Well, welcome to another Cliff's List webinar interview. Today, my guest is PJ Eby, who is a guy that was recommended to me by one of my readers. And PJ, I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this probably have never heard of you. And maybe you can take a few minutes and give us a bit of an introduction about yourself and what you do.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. Well, what I do mostly is I work with people who are struggling to reach their goals, usually in an area of academic, creative, or entrepreneurial, or ACE goals, as I call them, is mainly where I focus. But I do occasionally work with people on relationship issues or things involving their goals around meeting or connecting with women. So there's a little bit of overlap, but I'm definitely not your traditional dating guru. I've been married for about for 22 years now, so I don't really do any of that sort of thing or coach on specifics of anything like that. I help people get over their inner blocks with different things.
Well, I
Does that
think,
make sense?
yes, I think the question of inner game is very crucial for a lot of guys and obviously in many areas of their lives. Um, why don't you give me a quick rundown on how you, I guess, approach someone with an inner game issue when it comes to their relationship part of their life?
Well, as with anything else, the most important part is the reasons why we do things. Our brains are actually not very trustworthy in this area because we think we're doing something for one reason when in reality we actually have another reason going on. And to use a relationship oriented example, I once had a client who was working with some coaches who were helping him approach women in bars and all this type of thing. And he was frustrated and having difficulty staying motivated and all of this. And I basically asked him, well, what are you trying to actually accomplish? And at first he gave me some answers about meeting women. And I'm going like, yes, but you're not actually enjoying when you're doing this, are you? You're not actually enjoying talking to anybody. He was like, well, no. And just sort of like, okay, so what is it that you really want? And it's like, oh, okay, well, I want to get laid. Okay, well, so you're spending all this money on dating gurus. Couldn't you just go to a professional and get something done? And it's sort of like, well, but that's not really what I want either. So when you start actually peeling back all these layers of the reasons why we want things, and this applies even more, I think, in some ways to relationships than it does to the areas that I usually focus on with people, is that our real reasons for doing things are buried several layers below the layers that we consciously think about. And when you start peeling those back, you start finding things like, oh, well, maybe I don't want sex. What I actually am looking for is approval from women or acceptance. Or I want to be one of the guys and be able to brag about how I got laid or whatever because I feel left out when having a conversation about this. I mean, I've had people who've had those things when we've actually dug into it a little bit. You find out that the real reason that they're going after success with women doesn't actually have anything to do with success with women at all, or just like people who are working towards academic, creative, or entrepreneurial success are often doing it for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with the actual academics, creativity, or entrepreneurship. Does that make sense?
Sure, but so I guess the first step is then to try and uncover what's underlying their issues, I guess, and then I guess how would you take it to the next step? What would you do after that?
Well, that's actually not even the first step. The first step that I start with anybody on is I want to be able to pin down specifically the moment when they are having a problem, whatever that moment is, and then before trying to back up, because generally speaking, people. Let me put this. When I used to work in software development, and in the very early days of my career, I had to do technical support. One of the things I noticed is that the problem that people call you with is never the problem that they actually have or the problem that they need to solve. It's always something that their brain has projected as a candidate solution, and they want to know how to do that solution or to get that solution, when in fact, the very first thing that they actually need to do is take a step back from that perceived solution. This applies once again in the sense of what I would get as a presenting problem, let's say, from somebody in a relationship area might be approach anxiety. I want to get over my approach anxiety, or I want to stay motivated to do these practices and do all these approaches in the club or whatever like that. I've had a couple of presenting issues like that. And the very first thing I'm going to say is, well, when does this problem actually occur? What is the moment? What is the specific moment, or the moment of truth, as I call it, where you make the specific decision that leads to your problem? And that's not always obvious at first. So that's like one of the very first things we would do is try to find out, like, well, where are you having the problem? Well, let's say it's at the moment when you look at somebody and go, well, I don't want to go over there because I don't want to bother them, or something like that, right? And so we're looking at the thoughts and feelings that are occurring in that particular moment, because 99% of self-help is vague, hand-waving generalities, and you can't actually fix things in general. You can only fix them in specific, in particular. So we can work on what's happening in that moment, and we can change what's happening in that moment, and often do so in only a few minutes. Of course, that's not the only moment that is involved in that, right? Because in the very next moment, they might have a different thought, and so on and so on. But we can make changes that stick and that test in that particular moment. One of the particular things that I do is, once you've established a moment where the problem is occurring, you can almost always imagine that moment and still feel the same feelings or have the same thoughts, right? I can have somebody go and say, okay, well, last night I was doing this and I felt this. And I'm like, okay, so go back to that moment right now. And you'll feel that thing again, which means that there's a test that you can do to see whether you've actually changed something, right? 99% of self-help, like I said, is vague and general, of like, well, just try harder in one way or another, or just try this over and over, and again, something will change. I take an approach of testing where, if you actually go into that moment in your mind, if you go in and think about the same thing that you thought about before and feel the same feeling, and then we do something to change that, then afterwards you can imagine the same thing and the feeling doesn't reoccur. So it's like, think of it as being like a mechanic. You're saying, well, this car makes this noise when I do this, right? Well, unless you can make that noise in front of the mechanic, how will they know that they've fixed whatever's making the noise, unless they can make it make the noise on purpose? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So what I do with people is very test oriented in that way. We narrow it down to a specific moment when the problem is happening, and something that you can test by thinking about, oh, I think about getting started on my thesis, or I think about approaching somebody, or whatever it is that you think about and then have a negative reaction to. We can then go and pin down, where does that reaction come from? What is the thought that you're thinking? The way that I usually explain this is that the brain works, or the way that perception works, is that there's three things to it. It's PER in perception, right? We have prediction, evaluation, and response. And your brain automatically predicts in any situation what's going to happen next. Well, if I talk to that person, they're going to reject me, or they're going to laugh at me, or whatever, right? That's the prediction, their expectation of something that's going to happen. Then you have an evaluation. Well, that would be bad. And then you have a response, a feeling, or what have you. And both the prediction and the evaluation are things that can be changed, but the response cannot. The response is what happens as a result of that prediction and evaluation. We can go into your brain basically, and through asking some simple questions, we can change what you expect to have happen, or we can change how you evaluate what's going to happen. It's sort of like, well, they're going to reject me, and it's no big deal, right? It's not the prediction that's key there, it's the evaluation. You can think of two different guys who predict the exact same possible consequence of introducing themselves to somebody, and yet they have different reaction because their evaluation is different. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. Sure.
So that breakdown of prediction, evaluation, reaction is what I then use to help somebody make a change. This is, on the small level. In practice, most of the time, I don't actually do all of this with people. What I do is I teach people how to do it for themselves so that they can do it on the fly. If need be, you can basically duck into the restroom or something for a couple of minutes and go through the process of like undoing some of these things. But the thing is there are so many different things that we can predict and evaluate as being problems that it's not a process of just one and done, even though for that specific type of evaluation, you can very often get something that'll be like, oh, okay, boom, that changed a whole bunch of stuff for me. And now I don't have any problems in that area anymore. But now I have a new area I've gone on to in the next stage of my goal. I've gone to from, okay, I don't have a problem introducing myself. Now I have a problem with whatever, right? I mean, it's the same thing for academic, creative, and entrepreneurial goals. Okay, now I can get started on my work, but now I'm worried about actually submitting it to the, or I'm actually worried about actually going and selling this product now or whatever, right? It's like at each stage, you may have to do this work again because you've moved forward and you're no longer at the place where you were, but now you have a new self-evaluation that you need to investigate or reconsider or whatever.
So, how effective have you found this tactic in terms of helping guys with problems with women? Because I find that a lot of it is a very emotional thing, and just sort of acknowledging the the process is certainly not a bad thing, but it doesn't necessarily make a change.
Well, as we talked about when you first contacted me in email, as I mentioned that I don't really work a lot with this type of thing. I've had a few guys who, as a side issue, after they've basically had learned this and were applying it in the ACE goals area, who then had questions about applying it to relationship areas. And I honestly haven't done a whole lot of follow-up with them, so I couldn't actually tell you. But I do know that the issues that they brought to me were essentially one for one identical with the area in other areas of their lives, right? Whether you're seeking approval from women or whether you're seeking acceptance from men as being whatever your actual emotional issue is, it's the same, right? You have one of the sayings that I have is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so the same challenges are going to show up in whatever area of your life, and they're the same deeply emotional challenges. One of the terms that I use for this, what I sometimes call your quest. When we're young and we have certain types of very emotional experiences, like we get laughed at school or in front of a group or something, and then we vow that we're never going to have that happen to us again, right? You know what type of experience I'm talking about here, right?
Okay.
So a lot of times the problems that we have with achieving goals in any area of our life, whether it's relationship or otherwise, stem from these decisions that we make when we're very young, where we decide, well, I'm never going to be vulnerable in that way again, or I'm going to be perfect so no one can criticize me, or I'm going to be, whatever it is that you're going to be. Right? We decide this thing, and then that becomes the vehicle for all of the future goals that we want to accomplish, whether it's relating to relationships or any other area of your life. The quest kind of becomes this driving force in the background, and it leads to a process where, well, let me give you a specific example of how this played out in one of my clients' lives. I mentioned earlier that I was working with a guy who was actually working with dating coaches in the club, actually getting, okay, go do this, etc. type of advice. And he was finding it incredibly draining and frustrating because even though he was, according to his coach, making progress, he didn't feel like he was making any progress, and he felt more and more frustrated as time went on. And the reason for this is that because what he was trying to do and what he really wanted were not in alignment with each other, it produced, okay, so he wanted to be seen by other guys as somebody that was comfortable with talking to women and so forth. But since he wasn't actually comfortable in those circumstances, since he was trying to learn things in that context, the entire time, instead of feeling like he was succeeding or getting better, all he felt was, I'm still in this situation. I'm crappy with women. I'm crappy with women. In fact, because he's encountering that experience very vividly, right? More than just if he were staying at home thinking, this kind of sucks, I should be better with women. His actually going out and doing things was actually punishing himself by sort of rubbing his face in the fact that he wasn't being successful in the way that he wanted to be. Right? So the more that he actually pursued the goal, the worse he felt. And this is a common problem that people have in, like I said, in all areas of their lives, where you have a goal that even when you achieve it, it feels hollow because it's not really satisfying the thing that you actually are trying to accomplish. What he wanted was acceptance that wasn't going to come from talking to women, and so he wasn't enjoying himself, and that obviously had an effect on who he was interacting with, because people know when you're not enjoying actually talking with them. In contrast, when I was in college and I went to a bar and introduced myself to women or whatever, which this was pre-internet, so no availability of anything to help me with this process, but I actually enjoyed having conversations with women. So I got better at it because I was enjoying it. It was rewarding. And when you do something that's actually rewarding you because it's in line with what you want, which what I wanted was actually to have interesting conversations with women, that worked out fine for me. I didn't have the type of problems that, ironically enough, I had so much in the creative and entrepreneurial areas, where I did have other things that I was trying to prove, where I wanted to show them all, from all the kids who laughed at me or whatever, right? I had all these reasons why I wanted to do these projects and be famous or important or wealthy or whatever, and, prove to everybody that I was, I don't know, worthy of paying attention to or respect or something like that. But I didn't have those problems in the area of relating to women because I actually enjoyed having interesting conversations with them, and I wasn't trying to accomplish something else through that goal. So this kind of stuff that I'm talking about here would be most helpful for people who are struggling with trying to learn techniques or whatever, and it's frustrating because even when they manage to talk to somebody, it still feels like they're not succeeding, like they're not really accomplishing what they set out to do. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand. You'd made a remark about which a comment I've heard many times in the past about how you do one thing is how you do everything. How do you fix something like that with somebody typically?
Well, the best way to do it is to pick the place where it's easiest. One of the funny types of things that comes up, and this comes up, I've had people have this particular issue come up in the area of relationships before, is oftentimes we disapprove of people who are successful at the same thing that we want to succeed at. Okay, like you could be like, oh, those guys who are successful are women are assholes, for example, or oh, those people who exercise are fitness nuts, or whatever, whatever negative judgment it is or negative perception that you have of other people with that particular area of success or skill. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So that's an example of how you can leverage the how you do anything is how you do everything principle by changing how you respond to those other people. It's actually, ironically enough, it's easier to make that change when you're judging or blaming someone else. So let me pull this up here real quick. So there's a book by Byron Katie called Loving What Is, and there's actually, you don't even have to buy the book. You can go to thework.com and they've got a thing to get free worksheets to do this process. What they call a, what's the phrase here? Judge your neighbor worksheet. And what that will do is that you can write down all the things that you think about those people. Oh, those people shouldn't act like jerks. Oh, they should be nice to women. Whatever it is that your judgments are about that particular topic. And then there are questions that you can ask yourself that make you reflect. And the whole idea here, the idea of behind reflection that I'm referring to here, is that the way that we actually change our beliefs for the most part is not by, oh, I'm going to believe this different thing, or, oh, that belief is wrong. None of those things really make a difference to what you truly believe in your heart, sort of. Like, if you go into a haunted house, the classic example, you go into a haunted house and you don't believe in ghosts, but the place is creepy and it makes you feel weird, and your brain starts predicting that all sorts of crazy things are going to happen, and so you get frightened, right? Despite the fact that you believe that there's no such thing as ghosts. The important thing isn't what you believe in that verbal sense, but what you believe on a feeling level. And the way that this changes is it can't be done by arguing. You can't do it by saying, well, I know this is the right thing to believe, or whatever, or just ignoring what you already believe. The way that we actually change beliefs in our lives really is when we reflect and contemplate and go, gosh, this isn't really working for me. So what is the real deal here? Is this really true? Is this helpful? And the work of Byron Katie is these 4 questions. And I use this as kind of my go-to technique for belief change nowadays, because it's the simplest possible thing. I used to have a worksheet, a process that I made up. There was like 8 questions or whatever. And at some point I realized, you know what, this is just doing what the work does by a kind of more roundabout method. So I'm just going to recommend people to pick this up. But it only works if you are doing it in a state of wondering. It's like when you're a kid and you start, initially other kids tell you there's no Santa Claus, and you go, nuh-uh, right? Because you're not actually asking a question or thinking about it. But at some point you start to go, hey, wait a minute. Have my parents, it's like, has there ever been a time when, and you start asking yourself questions about like, well, how do I know, right? And what evidence do I have? And you actually consider it. That's when beliefs actually change. And at some point, when you finally go, oh, wait a second, that's right, I don't actually have any proof that Santa exists. It's all explainable by the theory that I'm being lied to by my parents. Everything makes perfect sense then. And then you no longer believe that. You can't go back. It's a one-way trip once you've actually come to the conclusion or gotten your brain to draw the conclusion that you've directed it to by those questions. And so the work of Byron Katie is a great method for redirecting your beliefs. And it especially works well when you have a belief that's a judgment of other people, or that can be reframed as a judgment of other people. One of the problems that I had with getting rid of my own perfectionism was that on some level, I always, I grew up in this environment where I was sort of taught that things were supposed to be done properly. And there was this like attitude that my parents had about people who don't care enough to do things properly. And until I actually could get rid of that judgment, not just for myself and go, okay, well, I need to be able to allow myself to not do things properly. But then my brain would be like, yes, but civilization will collapse, and there'll be no standards for anything. This, by the way, is an incredibly common objection that comes up when trying to change people's beliefs. Almost everyone I've ever worked with at some point runs into the, yes, but society will collapse, standards will be gone, we'll have chaos. And I think this is actually an inbuilt function of the brain that's designed to protect tribal standards, to help us basically maintain a society by telling us that if we let go of a particular rule or judgment, then society will collapse. No matter how irrelevant or useless the rule actually is, it's just if we grow up learning that rule, our brain goes, this rule is essential to the functioning of society, therefore it must be maintained at all costs. You will disapprove of people who break this rule. You will disapprove of yourself and feel guilty if you break this rule. And that can be, don't interrupt people while they're doing something, right? If that's a rule, then someone's not going to be able to go up and make an approach to somebody if they've grown up with a rule that has in their brain been marked as, this is crucial to the functioning of society. You cannot do this. And I've actually had the one or two of the people that had approach anxiety had something like that as a rule. The trick is, though, is that you can't actually get rid of that rule unless you're willing to let other people break the rule. You have to be willing to say, okay, well then, yes, I'm going to give up the righteous indignation that I can feel when somebody comes up and talks to me while I'm doing something. And the funny thing is that when you give up these judgments or beliefs, it doesn't matter what it's about. It could be anything to do with, it can be anything from interrupting people to beliefs about whether it's okay to be sexual or whatever else, right? It doesn't matter what it is, but you have to be able to or once you get to that point where where you can allow other people to do it too, which, as I said, the work of Byron Katie is especially good for. Once you've gotten to that point where you can allow other people to do it, what suddenly happens is that you realize that, oh, that feeling that I had, this indignation or upset or guilt or whatever associated with it, was just something that my brain was adding on top of whatever was already there. Yes, it might be a minor inconvenience for you to interrupt somebody, right? It might be a minor inconvenience to them. It might be a minor inconvenience to you that somebody interrupts you, but it's not a moral problem, right? It's just however inconvenient that actually is. But our brains don't know how to separate that actual problem from the, oh my God, this is a horrible thing that I can't do because, thou shalt not, in my brain. Does that make sense?
Yes. I guess it sounds though that in a lot of ways, most of the times you have these challenges, there's more or less a sort of a set way that you deal with them. Do you come across people having sort of variations, and you've got to sort of find new nuances to coach them?
So the process that I teach people is actually very linear, and there's some parts of it that remain the same, and there's some parts that are different. I call the overall approach collect, connect, correct, as in you collect information about the problem, you connect cause with effect to find where does this come from, and finally you correct and actually make a change. So in the collect stage is pretty much the same for everything, because you still have to get information, right? You still have to find out what the deal is. And there's some variation in correction. There are certain types of problems where this is specifically when you have a problem that's an embedded self-esteem issue, or self-image issue, I should say, where you believe that you're not something, like you're not a good person, you're not lovable, you're not capable. There's something that you believe that you're not, or alternately something that you believe that you are that's bad, like selfish, or I don't know. The point is that those types of qualities, certain of those types of things, I have a process called SAMHSA, which stands for Surface, Attitude, Model, Mirror, Shadow, Assumptions, where I have to, in the connect stage, go through all of that to like parse out all the different ways in which you learned this idea. And then I modify the work slightly. I add some questions that I've added to it that are specifically to address the sort of implicit parental. This might probably be a lot easier with an to explain with an example.
It's funny because I was just thinking, I've been having a number of discussions with one of my readers, and I was wondering if maybe I could sort of run some of what we've been talking about there and run it by you and see if you can.
Awesome. Let's do that.
That I thought that's something a little
bit
different.
I much prefer to deal in specifics, as I said earlier.
Basically, I have this guy, and he, there's nothing necessarily really wrong with him. He's a average to better to above average looking guy, and he just has this. He keeps coming up with the problem is that when he goes and talks to women, he finds that they just never seem to be interested, and he just doesn't really know what to do to change that. He's keeps running into that basic circumstance that he can't seem to attract them, and he doesn't really try. He tries very hard not to do anything creepy or pick-uppy. He just tries to do very normal sort of conversation, and it just doesn't seem to hook. And I don't know, maybe that's not exactly inner game here, but meanwhile, that's in his mind, the thing that's going on is that I keep saying the wrong things all the time.
Right. So you might have noticed I lit up with a smile when you started saying about all these things that he's trying not to do, because that would sort of be where my entry point would be, right? Because when you're trying not to do something, that's because you're afraid of something that's going to happen. right? So if he's
Mhm.
focused on trying not to be creepy or these other things, then that means that he's afraid that he is, which might actually be one of those types of beliefs that we were just talking about just now, right? I am creepy could be a self-evaluation that's been implanted, right?
Right.
I doubt it would be in exactly that form. One of the things that happens is that as we grow up, we layer all kinds of adult language on things, and usually I kind of have to strip that down a little bit to get back to the, what was the actual event? Oh, did you get called creepy by some girls when you were a kid or something like that, or overheard somebody talking about that creepy kid, right? Those might be places where somebody could pick up a self-perception like that. But more specifically, what I would probably do, one of the first questions that I would ask, apart from that, diving in on that trying not to part, is why is this important to you? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What do you actually want from this? Because most likely, the, the thing that's causing his problems, and it might not be at the specific, remember I said that when people bring you a problem, that's never really the problem. There's always a bigger problem, because if the problem that they were trying to solve, if that was a problem that could be solved, they'd already have solved it. It's always one level above. I think something along the lines of what Einstein said about how we can't solve problems at the same level of thinking where we created them. And so I always want to take at least one step back from whatever the immediate goal or issue is to, like, why are you even trying to do this in the first place? Because most likely whatever it is that's creating this lack of attraction stems from the fact, well, actually, just as a side note here, the fact that he's not getting interest probably means he's not showing any, because he isn't actually interested. He's trying to solve whatever problem he thinks becoming not creepy is going to solve. Does that make sense?
Yes. So you're saying that he's holding himself back when he approaches them, and not showing enough interest, so they're not sort of getting that sense from him that they are interested, that he is interested.
Yes, that could definitely be part of it. But I also mean that when you talk to somebody and your real goal has nothing to do with them, you're not. It's there's not really going to be very much connection. I mean, it's just the nature of the animal, because if you're there, and the thing is he's thinking about himself. Right? I mean,
Okay.
that by trying not to be something when you interact with someone, your attention is on you trying not to be that. So your attention, just by definition at that point, can't be on the other person. Does that make sense?
Right. So you're saying that he should be more in tune with what, I guess,
No. No, because he's not. If he could do that, he'd already be doing it. That's the what we need to address is whatever the reason is why he's doing that, not the actual doing. 99% of self-help tells people to change things that they have no power to change. It says do this, or try to be this, or be that, or don't feel this, or believe that, and we don't actually choose any of those things. We don't choose what to believe. We don't choose what to feel or respond in a particular situation. That comes from our perception and evaluation. We can change our prediction and evaluation. We can change what we predict or evaluate about the situation. And in this case, what needs to be changed is the evaluation in relation to, like, why is he even doing this in the first place? Because if he's not interested in actually making connection, if he's doing this for an ulterior motive because he wants to prove once and for all that he's not a creepy whatever person, then that's never going to actually work. That's what I refer to as a false goal. The goal that he thinks he has is address this problem or meet women, or there's some surface level goal that can be stated here. But the minute that you're doing all this try not to stuff, it's an indication that your real goal is at a higher level of, I need to prove to myself that I'm not a creepy person, or that I'm attractive, or that I'm not. Most likely, if he's trying not, there's something that he's trying to prove himself not, rather than something that he's trying to. Someone who is trying to prove themselves attractive would describe that problem differently, I guess is what I'm saying, right? Versus someone who's trying to prove themselves not unattractive, or not creepy, or not a nerd, or I don't know. I don't know what actual, without talking to the person, you can't know what their actual language is that they're using in their head, that they are, of what their real goal is that they're trying to solve. But if you can identify that, you can fix that goal. And then what happens is that, boom, the problem just dissolves because he no longer has to try to not be creepy because he won't be paying attention to that because that's not the issue anymore, if that makes sense. Right? It'll be whatever his next issue is. Because
Okay.
right, it's sort of like I was saying, when I was in college, how many ever decades ago, um, and talking to women because I wanted to talk to women, I was interested in having conversations. I didn't have any problems doing that because I was actually interested in having the conversation. So people pick up on that. You have a conversation if there's any possibility of chemistry at all. And if they don't, it's not a big deal because my goal wasn't to try and prove that I could, get a date with any woman or get laid with any woman or whatever in order to prove that I'm not socially awkward or forever alone or something, right? Does that make sense? If I'm not doing it to prove this other thing, then I don't have any problem with it. The people that I can get you guys refer to as naturals or whatever are basically people for whom there isn't something hanging over their head that they're trying to get out from under by doing this. So there's no threat there. The rejection doesn't mean anything. It's like, well, of course you just move on and ask somebody else. Well, they're not interested in having a conversation. I want to have a conversation with somebody who wants to have a conversation with me. So I'll go talk to somebody else. Right, and still have a good time. It's no, as I say, it's no big deal. I sometimes refer to this as the art of the no big deal. No matter what your goal is, academic, creative, entrepreneurial, relationship, personal, if it is no big deal to you to fail, then you can actually enjoy yourself. So I always want to be looking for what kind of failure are they trying to avoid? Right? What is the actual failure they're trying to avoid? Because if you can get to a state where you're at no big deal about that specific failure, then it's no big deal. This is actually the most fun part of my job, is working with someone and getting them to that point where suddenly it's no big deal, because there's always there's like a light on their face, or just like this tone of relief in their voice. It's like, oh, I guess I could just talk to people then, or I guess I could just put my stuff up for sale, or I guess I could just ask for the raise or the job or whatever, or for more money on this deal or whatever it is. They're just like, oh, okay. I refer to that as the art of the no big deal, because when you get to that place, it's like, well, it's not like you need to be pumped up and motivated to do something. It just needs to be no big deal. And when you get to that state, it's magical, because you just can suddenly see things that you could do that were before like, oh, I couldn't possibly say that, or I couldn't possibly do that. If you brought up that idea before, if you actually tried to tell somebody, well, do this or do that, or stop doing this or whatever, if you try to actually direct behavior, you get these responses of, oh, I couldn't do that, or that's not me, or whatever. But when you get to the no big deal place, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I could do that. Or they just think of things that they didn't think of, that wasn't anything that you might have suggested, but something uniquely them that they can do in that situation. Again, doesn't really matter what type of goal it is. When you get to that no big deal place, ideas flow. That's why, my motto for my side is from stress and struggle to focus and flow. When you get to the no big deal state about something, you stop struggling with it and you just do something. If that makes sense.
Interesting. Okay. So, so for this particular guy, he's getting in his own way by trying not to be a certain way, and that's preventing him from getting to, having a real discussion with someone where he's showing some real interest in them.
Yes. And that would be and the cause of that is the thing that we need to change, because trying to not try to get out of your own way is not going to work either, right? It's
Right.
like, I used to read all these self-help books that would talk about not punishing yourself and not criticizing yourself and all that, and then all I did after that was beat myself up about not stopping beating myself up. So that doesn't actually help, because there's something that drives the behavior, and the drive is nearly always something that we're something that we're afraid we are and don't want to be. we're afraid that we're selfish or uncaring or awkward or unattractive, unlovable, unacceptable, unworthy. All of these types of things, and there's really actually only that you can really kind of boil all that down to just 3 categories that I work with that I call EPIC for esteem, power, predictability, and independent collaborator or important contributor. And they're sort of fundamental evolutionary drives that we have for how to fit into a group and be part of a society. And these needs to be epic, as I put it, tend to drive in one way or another almost anything that we're having this type of challenge with, because our need to be these things is so great that if any of them gets interrupted in childhood because we don't get the approval that we need from our parents or from our peers, or we don't fit in, or we experience rejection, it kicks off a drive to fix this problem by any means necessary. And we'll then go through adolescence searching for ways to make this problem go away. And then that's when we start searching for answers and start reading all the self-help books or the how to pick up girls books or whatever it is, that we're seeking a way to solve this vital problem. But at the same time, we don't want to think about it, right? We don't want to think of ourselves as pathetic or unlovable or unattractive or whatever it is. We don't want to think about that. So we focus instead on the ideal. I'm going to become perfect, or I'm going to be a gentleman at all times, or I'm going to be polite, and I'm going to make whatever it is that ideal is, then becomes the thing that you seek instead. So it takes a couple of layers from where you're saying, hey, I'm trying not to be creepy. Okay, but why? And it's like, oh, well, I want to be such and such. Okay, but why is that? What is that covering up? Oh, I am afraid that I am, that nobody's actually going to like me if they actually talk to me, because everybody thinks I'm creepy or whatever. And then if we remove that belief, then it becomes no big deal, because you no longer have to struggle to become this thing that you've now realized that you never, that you already are, or that you never were, depending on which. It gets a little confusing to talk about, because people have things that go both ways, right? They have things that they're trying not to be that they're afraid they are, and the things that they're trying to be to cover up something that they're afraid they're not, or vice versa. All the different permutations. That the point is that there's always at least one layer of defense in between the thing that you're really trying to do and the thing that you say you're trying to do. There's like a layer, the layer of defense in between. And once we leapfrog that, there's no reason to defend yourself anymore. So there's no more reason to try to not be creepy. So then you might just be yourself, and you might discover either I enjoy talking to women in clubs, or I don't. And maybe I'd rather actually, after leaving college, I very quickly decided that I much more enjoyed talking to women at parties that were thrown by friends of mine, because I was much more likely to have more interesting conversations, and find women that were actually interested in me. So, you may learn that the way that you're trying to go about something, a lot of times people pick a bad way to go after their goal, because the way that they're picking is more associated in their mind with what they think they need to do in order to accomplish the goal, if you see what I mean. The person who was going to the clubs with a dating coach wanted to get successful at picking up people in bars, because that was sort of the stereotypical guy thing that he needed to do in order to feel like he was one of the guys, or like he was acceptable as a man. But without that going on, right, once we address the underlying drive there of, oh, I need this in order to be accepted as a man and by my peers. Once that was no longer something that he was trying to do, to be honest, I don't actually know what happened from there. All I know is that he didn't complain about the problem anymore after that. I don't know whether he stopped going, whether he just quit the pickup thing altogether, or whether he just, did like I did and started just meeting people other ways and just actually meeting people naturally. I honestly don't know what happened with that, but because as far as I'm concerned, it's sort of like, once it's no big deal, he'll find whatever way actually makes sense for him, just like I did. That's kind of the way
So,
I look at it.
so you said that what you used to do is mostly just meet people naturally. How would you help somebody sort of accomplish that simple goal alone?
Well, I mostly help people with goals that they're having problems with. If you're not having a problem with it, there's vast amounts of things out there in any subject area you care to name, right? If you don't have a problem with it, I mean, 99% of what's written for any subject is assuming that people don't have a problem doing it. So what I would very first thing I'd say is, well, if you don't have it, come to me when you have a problem with it, because if you don't have a specific problem that you're encountering, then there's nothing really that I'm going to be spending my time with all the people who have problems doing something.
Okay, so somebody who basically has trouble meeting people, you would what would you advise them then?
Well, the very first question is, I'm going to want to know why they want to meet someone. What is the actual, because 99% of the time when somebody comes to me with a problem about something, the ultimate reason has something to do with why they're doing it in the first place. It's the saying that I use is, what pushes you forward holds you back. Almost any time that we struggle with something, and to be clear here, when I talk about struggle, I'm talking about a sense of being blocked, or a sense of having imposter syndrome, procrastination, perfectionism, self-doubt, self-sabotage, whatever you want to call it, right? Whenever you're having a problem that isn't, if it was an outside problem, you would just solve it, right? You just Google, okay, how to do this thing, and then you would do it, right? I mean, if you don't have an inner problem. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So if you're at the point where you're saying, hey, I'm trying to do this thing and I'm frustrated, well, either you'd be looking for how to solve the specific problem if it was an outside problem, or else we need to look at what's going on inside. Because let me put it this way. Remember way back when I said, like, okay, so are you doing this to have conversations? Do you enjoy having conversations with women? Are you trying to get laid? Well, if that's really your goal, why don't you just see a professional? And it's like, there's a point there where somebody goes like, but that wouldn't really be the real, that's, somehow that's not acceptable as a solution, right? You can think of it as the yes, but problem. You try to give somebody advice about something, they're like, yeah, but, or just going, oh, but that would, like, what they're really trying to say there, while they're hemming and hawing about it, is, but that wouldn't get me what I really want deep down.
Right.
Right. And that's what I'm going after, is, well, what is it that you want really deep down then? Right. That's what we need to find out, because that behind the scenes, one person explained this in kind of an interesting way. It's sort of like, let's say that you decide that you want to be rich, and rock stars make a lot of money. So you're going to become a rock star, and you're going to practice music to become a rock star. That will not work. That will not work because, well, I mean, I don't know, you might be able to still get a music deal. I don't know. But my point is you won't be motivated to practice. You will struggle with practicing the music. You will have trouble with it. It will be irritating to you, because it will feel like it is not actually connected to your real goal of being famous and rich or whatever. Do you understand what I'm saying here?
The real goal is to be famous and rich. It's not to be a rock star, basically.
Right. And the problem is if you transfer this analogy now to dating, people will say that they want to meet women or get a girlfriend or get laid or whatever, but their real goal is something else beyond that. And so they'll struggle with whatever the details are, because those details don't feel connected to the real goal. They don't feel like they're getting, if your goal is to feel accepted by women, then going out and practicing cold approaches is going to make you feel less accepted by women than ever before. Right? If on a fundamental level, if that's your real reason. right? I didn't have that as my reason for going and asking girls to dance and then have interesting conversations with them when I was a teenager, or later on when I was going to parties and having interesting conversations there. If somebody didn't want to have a conversation, it's not the end of the world, because I wasn't looking for, I wasn't trying to get this hole in my soul met by this thing. I wasn't trying to actually be, in the rock star analogy, rich or famous. I wanted to enjoy music because I like music. And if you like music, you'll practice playing music because you like it.
So,
And it's no big deal.
right, but so let's say that you're right on target there. That they are really looking for validation and acceptance, and that's the underlying. Is that the underlying reason they want to meet women and have success with them? Um, how would you deal with that?
Well, there's another book that I actually suggest to people in that context, and this is something that there's a lot of good stuff in this book. Byron Katie's "I Need Your Love, Is That True?" And there's an awesome set of exercises in here for discovering all the ways in which you seek approval from people that you might not be aware that you're actually doing. And so it but what this specific exercise, the ultimate approval giver exercise in the book that I highly recommend to people, is that it's a tool that you can use to find out where you're blocking your own sense of inner approval. Because people who are okay with interacting with women, who don't have a problem with it, who aren't seeking that approval or acceptance or whatever, they are not they're not blocking their own approval of themselves. Or to put it another way, they have their own approval, so they don't need the other person's approval. It's nice to have, it's still enjoyable, it still gives you a warm feeling, right, to actually have somebody's approval. But when you don't have it, it's not going to hurt. The specifically what this exercise is, just to it's incredibly simple, really, and it basically amounts to you take a situation and you try to imagine, what do I want that person to say to me, right? How do I want them to actually respond? What am I looking for? Like if it's like, oh, you're, oh wow, you're so hot, or or like whatever, or oh, I'm interested in you, or whatever the response is that you want to get from somebody. And then what you do is basically you ask yourself if you could say that to yourself. More often than not, what you find is that whenever anybody's seeking a particular kind of approval, they can't say that to themselves, right? Like I might want to have, at one point, I wanted people to say, oh, you did a really good job on this. This is an amazing project or whatever. But I couldn't say that to myself, right? Because on some level, I didn't believe it. The truth is we're only hurt by rejection when we agree on some level with the rejection. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so it's sort of like, well, or we think that it's meaningful. I mean, if somebody basically, when I was in college and I go, hey, you want to dance? And somebody said no, it's like, okay, that's not anything. It doesn't actually mean anything about me because they haven't even met me yet.
Right.
Right. But if you're going up there with already an idea that you're this awful, unworthy person or whatever, then that rejection just confirms what you already believed inside, and it hurts. So the key is to grasp, what are you looking for, and then find out what's stopping you, or like in my case, what was stopping me from being able to say this is good work. And turned out I had rules about, well, you can't, you're not supposed to praise yourself. You're not supposed to be proud of just doing what you're supposed to do anyway. I mean, I had like a pile of shit from my parents about these things that I had to individually go through. But when you've identified them, you can use the other techniques that we were talking about, how you get rid of judgments of like, well, people shouldn't be, whatever, or people shouldn't interrupt people, or whatever those rules are, right? There's always rules that are blocking your sense of approval for yourself, or either rules or those deep self-image beliefs like I'm awful, unworthy, unlovable, whatever, which require slightly different approaches to actually fix, and definitely different approaches to track down. But ultimately, the actual fix is only a few questions. I mean, once you've identified one of these things, that's the really cool thing about mind hacking and what I do in general, helping people with these things is that it only takes a few minutes to change once you know what it is that you're trying to change. The hard part is identifying what it is that you've got going on in your head already, and it's never the thing that people think it is. Almost always, the rules that we have that are fucking us up the worst are things that we think are good for us. We think we're being a good person by not interrupting people or not being sexual or whatever it is, right? We think that it makes us feel moral and righteous to keep following that rule, and morally superior to the people who don't, even if they're getting more success at the thing that we want.
Right.
So, but once we remove those rules and they're no longer a source of righteousness, of righteous feelings and indignation and, moral whatever, then it becomes once again, no big deal. It's like, oh, okay, I can say to myself, I actually did a pretty good job on that, or I'm, actually pretty decent looking, or whatever it is, right? When you can actually get to the point where that's actually true. Not, Stuart Smalley stand in the mirror and say, I'm, smart enough, good enough. It's like, that doesn't work. You can't argue yourself into those feelings. Standing in front of a mirror or doing it in any other way is not actually going to change anything. The only use of saying that kind of stuff in front of a mirror is to find out what objections come up in your head. Right? When you say, I'm good enough, and you go, no, because this, and this. Now you have something to work with. You've got to believe that you can identify and change. The only time I ever tell people to say stuff like that is like in this approval giver exercise, where the point is for you to, well, what is it that I want them to say to me, or how do I want them to respond? Okay, well, can I do that? And then, no. Okay, well, why not? What's stopping you? Good.
What about when someone's got a very tangible problem? Let's say they, true or not, they can perceive themselves as being unattractive or ugly or something like that. And that's holding them back from having any kind of relationships. Is there some kind of way that you can deal with that? It's just obviously
Yes.
change the way they're thinking about themselves, obviously.
Well, again, we don't do that by actually having somebody try to change, because the moment that you're trying, you're dying. I mean, that doesn't work. What we need to do instead is change the prediction or the evaluation. Now, let's say that someone's appearance isn't that great on a, scale as judged by the majority of people. What they're predicting is most people aren't going to think I'm attractive. The real leverage is not in trying to believe something different there. The difference that we can make is in the evaluation. What does that mean, right? Well, it means that you're going to have to be more niched in your search for people, right? You're going to need to find people who value something other than that appearance, right, in order to actually find someone that's going to be a good partner for you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. So again, there's always a thought process involved, but we don't control our thoughts. Trying not to think that you're ugly or trying to think I'm attractive, your brain's going to be going the whole time, bullshit. I love that. There's a Robert Fritz, who's one of my favorite authors in the self-help field, was talking about that in concept and talking about how you really can't bullshit your brain. If you start telling it things that you don't actually believe, it's going to be sitting there going bullshit. And you can't change what you think. All you can do is convince your brain to reevaluate what it predicts or evaluates. We can ask questions like, okay, so sometimes when making changes in myself, my brain's prediction was I'm going to get yelled at, which was a perfectly valid prediction at the time that I was growing up as a kid. There were plenty of things that I would get yelled at for. That's a perfectly valid prediction. It was just out of date once I no longer lived with my parents. But our brain doesn't update our beliefs or predictions or evaluations unless it's specifically, think of it this way, in our evolutionary environment, let's say that There's no longer, there was a place that was good to hunt or get some berries or whatever, and now it's all been, collected out. There's nothing on the bush. Well, when you get that, you're going to go there expecting that there's still berries on the bush, but when you get there, there's no more berries. And so your brain is confronted by a contradiction between what was predicted and what result it got. And it goes, oh, I need to update. The problem comes in is that when we grew up in a situation like where I grew up, where I'd get like yelled at for not knowing how to do things that I'd never actually been taught yet.
It's a crazy making there.
Yes. The problem is, though, is that since it's intermittent, it's not I don't always get yelled at. It has to be just the right circumstances. It depends on their mood. It depends on all these different circumstances. Your brain or changes the threshold required to update the prediction. Right. The threshold is well, sometimes they yell at me, sometimes they don't yell at me. So just one not yelling is discarded as not evidence. Right. So if I were to go and do the thing that got me yelled at when long after I've moved out and grown up or whatever, and I do the thing and I don't get yelled at, my brain doesn't update because, well, that sometimes happens. So it just ignores that. It ignores it repeatedly every single time I don't get yelled at. Right. This is also why some people can learn to get over their issues with approach anxiety by practice, and some people can't. The people who can't have a prediction or evaluation who is not contradicted by their results. If they're thinking in their mind, I'm unattractive, I'm shy, whatever, and they talk to somebody and that person is actually nice or interested or whatever, they internally discard that because, they're just being polite or whatever. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So that belief can't be changed. It's like no matter what that person does, no matter how many times they practice approaching, and no matter how well it goes, they literally cannot learn that way that people like them, even if people do.
Right.
The only way you can change that is to force your brain into a contradiction of its own. Right? You can force it to reevaluate the evidence, just like when our ancestors saw that, empty berry bush, they had to go, oh, well, I guess there's no point in coming back here then, right? Or whatever. Or what we talked about earlier, that, oh, wait a minute, Santa Claus isn't real, it's all my parents. We want to have that same type of discovery process, and that's what the questions of the work do, is they lead you to go, well, is that really true? Am I going to get yelled at? And when you think about it, and this is the important part, right? Because you have to actually want to know, right? You can't just go through this process mechanically and go, oh, is that true? Well, of course not, right? That surface thought process doesn't actually do anything because you're not engaging the parts that are actually making the prediction or the evaluation. You have to engage those parts. And the only way you can do that is curiosity and wondering. As an example, sometimes I ask new clients, how many, when you go to work in the morning or go to school or whatever it is, how many left turns do you make getting there? And they always start to go, well, I go, and they start visualizing it. And I go like, stop right there. That experience that you're doing of the having to go inside and figure it out, that is the precise experience that you need to do 99% of self-help techniques that involve changing beliefs or, whatever, right? The step that most people miss is that in order for these questions or things to think about or whatever it is that people give you in self-help books, it doesn't work unless you get into that mental state of searching. The NLP folks call it transderivational search, if you're familiar with that concept. But unless you go into that state where you go like, is that true? Is there really a Santa Claus? Could it be my parents doing that? Or am I going to get yelled at if I do this? Well, and it's not visualization where you consciously try to visualize. It's like the figuring out how many left turns you take going to work. You have to let your brain project it to you, right? If there's any images, they're just going to be images that come up as a result of you asking the question. You're not answering the question, your brain is, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Okay.
right? If you use that state of mind with the work or the ultimate approval giver or any of these other things, you will actually get information, and the process of retrieving that information will make connections that will change how you perceive situations. Right? The person in the person who, we said there's like, so one kind of person can practice approaches and they'll feel better about it because they realize that people will actually like them a lot of the time or whatever, and the other person won't. Well, the person who is doing it because they don't have anything blocking them from reevaluating, so they go, that wasn't so bad after all, right? They're doing that little mental evaluation afterwards, and they're updating their prediction of what's going to happen and their evaluation of what it means about them. But the other person is defending their existing predictions and evaluations. They're predicting that that people aren't going to like them, but they're going to evaluate anything that they get as meaning, well, they were just being polite. They didn't really like me. And that's not a great example for this particular type of reevaluation, because it's not about, I mean, you could go straight after that and go like, was that true? Is it really that they were being polite? And you might, when they go and think about it, they might go, well, actually, no. If they were just being polite, they wouldn't have smiled like that, or whatever, right? You might actually be able to get some headway on that. With that particular belief, I'd actually prefer to go straight to wherever the original belief that they're not likable came from in the first place, and just go after it there. But you could address it at that level as well. Or in my case, with well, they're going to yell at me if I do that. I can just go and go, was that actually true? And I go, well, no, not really, because I don't live with my parents anymore, and my wife's not going to yell at me about that. So, right, it's not going to happen. Okay, so then I go to the next question of the work of like, so how do I react when I think that way, right? How do I react when I think that people are going to yell at me? And I go like, well, I don't want to do this, and I feel like, I don't want to work on this project anymore. And then I go, okay, so what would it be like if I didn't think that way? I go, well, then I guess it would be no big deal. I would just do it. Okay, that sounds good. Let's just do that, right? If you actually go through that process, that's just a really rapid fire example. When I actually did that for real, it took a few more minutes than that, because I had to go. One of the things that happens sometimes when you're going through that, how do I react when I think this? There's a whole bunch of, man, I've just been screwing up my whole life thinking this way. I did this. Oh my God, I did that. And or you go to the, who would I be without this thought? And I'm like, oh, I should have done this or that or the other in this other situation that I remember where I've been doing this all the time. I've been doing, or just like, I've been doing this screwed up thing my whole life. But then after that, you get to the, oh, okay, well, I guess I could just do things. It's no big deal.
Right. So what do you find are the main things that people come to you for in terms of their issues that, what's your kind of your specialties, and what do you have the most effective results from?
Well, as I said, most everything that people come to me with boils down in one way or another to the epic equation of EP and IC, the three needs, the underlying needs that we have are nearly always what screw us up. I actually go broader than that. My general thing is that I prefer to work with people who are what I call triple S people: smart, sensitive, systematic thinkers, because they're people who are not addressed well by most self-help material. I think this might not be the case in the area of relationships, because I think there are a lot of people who fit that triple S mold who actually end up developing a lot of materials in this area. And that's why I tend to more focus on the academic, creative, entrepreneurial, because there's really nothing out there for people who are struggling to prove themselves in those areas and have those particular types of challenges where, people who are systematic thinkers have trouble with taking things on faith. They have trouble with, just believe in yourself or just do it, or any of the other kinds of, kind of off the shelf, one size fits all advice that works for people who are already extroverted and already, and aren't particularly systematic thinkers and just need to do that kind of, just do it, go out there and just keep doing it until you succeed type of advice that you get for the most part in almost everything. So likewise, because those people are smart, they're harder. It's one of the reasons it's hard for them to fool themselves is because they're smart enough to know, like I said, your brain goes bullshit when you try to say things that you don't actually believe. So if you're smart and you're a systematic thinker and you're emotionally sensitive, then most traditional self-help advice for actually accomplishing anything in your life or doing anything in almost any area, including relationships, is going to be focused on things that are harder for you to do because of that. People who are more emotionally sensitive, more introverted, are not going to be having a good time from the moment they stepped into the club. So you've already got it's sort of like you're already operating at a handicap there, which is why, like I said, later on, I kind of realized that I had a lot more fun meeting people at parties than I did at the club when, where there's, parties that involved people who actually wanted to have conversations rather than just turn the music up loud and get high. So, that worked a lot better for me because I enjoyed myself more. And there were people that actually were interested in me at those parties, much more often was the case than elsewhere. So I would say that for people who are having issues with dating or relationship type things, if they were going to work with me, it would be if they're having inner challenges or they are doing something outwardly, but it isn't producing success, if they're faking it but not making it, let's say. That's really actually kind of a good synopsis of what I do with people in all areas of goals is that people who are trying to fake it and aren't making it, or not feeling like they are making it, or are just blocked and struggling with trying to do the thing that they already know what they need to do, they're just not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, maybe you can tell people here who are listening to this about, what they could do if they wanted to follow up with you to either get some coaching from you, or I don't know if you have any products or events that you put on. Maybe you can tell them a little bit about what they could do to learn more from you.
Sure. And basically, I would say that if you visit theeffortlessway.com, there is a free course that you can sign up for there. Just go to effortlessway.com, read the front page, click the button, sign in, check out. It's free right now. I want to get some feedback on the new course structure that I've set up there. And after that, you'll of course get information about any upcoming products and services. I mostly work through membership programs. I have a membership for the Effortless Way where you get workshop material each month on these things where I've previously had work with other clients or people in my other group, the Mind Hackers Guild. And we do workshops on things like, all of these topics, those slides I was showing you with the books actually came from previous workshops that I've done. I figured they would be relevant to our talk today, and it turned out they were. So I do actually workshops where I teach these techniques. I have videos and PDFs and all the usual good stuff. But I also do coaching programs where I work through these techniques with people online after you've read the materials or watched the videos or whatever for the techniques that I've suggested are appropriate for your particular situation. And then I basically do troubleshooting or technical support, you might say, for the techniques. Most of the time when you get self-help material, you are just given material and expected to do something. And what I've found is that it's nearly impossible for most people to actually apply any self-help technique without getting the technical support at least once. One of my past clients compared it to getting taught a musical instrument. You can learn how to play a musical instrument from a book, but you'll make mistakes that you'll never know that you're making unless you actually have a music teacher at some point go, hey, you're holding your finger wrong on that. That's why you're having that problem there. And like, oh, okay. But once you've had that correction, you can practice on your own. And so I rarely actually do very much direct one-on-one coaching with people, except for getting them over that initial hump, helping them get into that, I wonder or getting them used to asking questions and querying their internal state. Because once you've got that part down, most of the rest of what I teach is actually pretty easy to apply, and it's just giving people troubleshooting hints through my forums of like, oh, have you considered that maybe you're thinking this? Or the most common question I ask, so what are you trying to get out of that? Okay, now work on that. Right? Apply the techniques that you were trying to apply to this other thing. Apply it to the why you're trying to do that instead of the thing that you think you need to apply it to. That's like the most common form of assistance that I give people, because it's really hard for you to know that you're doing something like that. Your brain will just generate thoughts that you don't even notice that you're thinking. You just kind of just get pushed down the path of your existing thought process, and you don't notice you've already passed the point where you could change it. Now you're just downstream struggling with feelings of frustration or rejection or whatever it is, when it was the thought that you had 10 seconds ago that's the real problem. And we have to have to back you up to that to the thought that's actually causing the problem downstream.
Interesting, definitely. Well, look, I think you've shared a lot of interesting angles from, I guess, from a self-improvement point of view for the people listening to this, and I'm sure that some of them are going to find this very interesting and get back in touch with you, and hopefully engage you for some further instruction and change work.
That would be great.
So I
look forward to it.
So
I really enjoy people getting those aha moments and well, I could just do it.
Right.
That is the most fun part of my job is like hearing that, oh, I could just do it. Yeah. That's fun. So come work with me and we'll have some of those.
Sounds really good. Well, look, I want to thank you again for taking the time with me today, and I'm sure we'll get some very good feedback on this very shortly.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you.
Soon. Okay.
Bye.